Welcome to VidZet. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. As you know, VidZet got started looking at the medical problems of a prominent political figure, Hillary Clinton. Today we return to that tradition and we look at another prominent political figure, Senator John McCain. Now, Senator McCain has been in the news lately for several reasons. Among other things, a lot of Republicans have really questioned whether he's a Republican because he has opposed so many Republican initiatives. Well, he has claimed that he's a maverick. But then on June the 8th, he asked a whole bunch of questions of FBI Director Jim Comey, where those questions were just plain strange. Now, he later explained that, maybe these questions were above your heads, implying that McCain was smarter than the reporters or others. But really, his questions didn't make a whole lot of sense. And then we discover, about less than a week ago, that he's had surgery. And initially it was, they found a blood clot on a routine exam. And that blood clot was removed by a little incision through his left eyebrow. Now, it's real common for surgeons to go someplace like this and say, okay, I've got hair here. If I were to make an incision inside the eyebrow and then do whatever I can through that, when everything heals up and the eyebrow grows back, nobody will ever see the scar. And that's really a very common way to do things. But the question is, what's behind his left eyebrow? Well, then we find that, actually what he had done was a craniotomy. Okay, translation. They cut in through the bone of his skull to get toward his brain. And they removed a blood clot 2 inches long, 5 centimeters. That's about 2 inches. That's a big blood clot. Okay? And you say, wait a minute. What kind of a blood clot would be there? Well, John McCain is 80 years old and is someone who's done an awful lot of anesthesia for neurosurgery. There's one thing that just flat jumps out at me. This was almost certainly a chronic subdural hematoma. Now, he did have a melanoma. He had a bunch of procedures for melanoma, and there's some small chance that this could be related to a recurrence in metastasis, but it's really not very likely. Now, chronic subdural hematoma is relatively common in his age group, and it runs about 1 in 1,000 people. And only about half of people who get chronic subdurals actually have any history of trauma. I mean, it could have been something as simple as he bumped his head just by not ducking enough as he got into a car. That may be all it takes. Because what happens as you get older is that the mass of the brain shrinks a bit, and the veins along the top of the brain get a little bit fragile. You think about every older person you've met. Many times you'll see that they get easy bruising because the veins in their skin get very fragile. That happens around the brain too. And so a chronic subdural, maybe he just bumped his head, paid no attention to it, and then it bled. But it bled just a little bit at a time. It seeped in. And this is the way subdurals grow. They get bigger. Now, when we look at a subdural hematoma, what happens? As one neurologist put it, subdural hematoma is the great neurologic imitator. It can look like everything under the sun. But one of its common concerns is it is one of the treatable causes of dementia. And over half of patients who have chronic subdural hematoma start to have difficulties with their thought processes. 50 to 70% have altered mental states. They can have confusion or drowsiness. Does this sound like John McCain in that committee hearing? He was a little confused. He asked confused questions. Sure does to me. And then over half of them will get what's called hemiparesis. That is, they get a weakness. Now, let's talk a little bit about the brain. I'm right-handed. I believe John McCain is right-handed. That means my left side of my brain is my dominant hemisphere. So the things that are involved in my thinking are the ones that come from the left side. He had a clot behind his left eye. That means it's pushing on the left frontal lobe. That's where you think. So it would be most likely that someone with a clot in that position is going to have thinking problems. The question really revolves around why did they lie about it and say he had a routine exam. You don't end up with a craniotomy out of a routine exam. He had something going on that said, Doc, let's find out what's happening. And it may be his aides looked at him and said, John, you're not thinking straight. You got to get this checked. And he did have enough going to say, I'm going to find out. But he did a Hillary Clinton and said, it was a routine exam. Duh. Not happening. Now, the most common actual neurologic deficit is language. Now, your language center is a little bit underneath and toward the left, but still, pressure up front can cause problems there. And a large number of patients with chronic subdurals will have headaches. So maybe that's what got him going. But why couldn't he tell us, look, I've had some problems, we're getting this checked out? Why did he have to say, oh, it's a little clot behind the eye, we made this little skin incision, we're done, when in fact they went through the bone near the brain? Now, a quick bit of anatomy is in order here also, because when we look at blood clots near the brain, when you have a subdural, it is between the dura, which is the big tough lining layer around the brain that contains all of the spinal fluid, and the pia and arachnoid, which are tightly adherent to the brain itself. So there's a little bit of a space with fluid in there. And if this grows enough, it can actually cause some injury to the brain tissue itself. Now, the problem here is, does evacuating the clot get rid of all of our medical concerns? And the answer is absolutely not. We have somewhere between 8 and 37% get symptomatic recurrences. Oh, and that's after you have a recovery period, which isn't 1 week like he's saying. It can be a month or more where you have recovery period. 11% of patients will get seizures. And the question that really tells us what's going on is, what was his pre-op neurological state? Which he has not told us, because that's the best indicator of how he's going to do post-op. If he was having focal deficits, if he was having notable confusion, then that's the best predictor of what's going to happen afterwards. And it certainly appears that he was having confusion. And if he's having confusion pre-op, it's likely to happen again post-op. And like I said about Hillary Clinton, if you can't think properly, you don't belong in a position of responsibility. You need to step out and let somebody else do the job. Now, the question is, what happens? His best move, frankly, is to retire on medical grounds. Nobody would fault him for anything there. You just say, look, this has turned out to be a bigger problem than we anticipated. I'm going to retire. And guess what? The governor of Arizona is a Republican, so he would appoint a Republican to replace John McCain. But better than that, the law of Arizona says he has to replace a Republican with a Republican. So this won't change the balance of the Senate. What it may do is allow Arizona to have a senator who actually represents the Republican values of freedom, a reduced government, and then we might have someone who would actively support repeal and replace of Obamacare, major tax reform, and all the things that are so important to getting America back on track and making America great again. John McCain needs to retire. He can do it gracefully. No one will blame him for anything. It needs to happen. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. Thanks for watching.